So when we go into community, that's why we did the handshake to start off with, the fascial handshake, because that removes the energetic stress. But we still have physical stress in our body. So that's why we did that.
All right. So thanks again, Manvinder and Gary, for joining. And firstly, congratulations on your 800K.
Thank you so much.
You big YouTube 65, almost like 70. So how do you think, Gary, you're going towards the 1 billion?
I think it takes 1 million people to hit 1 billion.
Oh,
because everybody knows somebody, and fascial maneuvers is something that once you've had the personal experience and you've done it yourself and you've felt it, there's a natural tendency to want to share it with people. And so, we have about 2.25 million on our social media, but by the time this airs and people hear it, we'll be in the tens of millions. It's really about having people that have had personal experience. And what we do is we start off, our impact for this year is to reach 1 billion people, let them know who we are, let them know that we're doing something that helps them heal their own body, and that they have the power to heal their own body. Because at this point right now, it's physically having everybody do something completely, do our whole program at 1 billion people. That's probably not going to happen this year, but to have 1 billion people go through an experience where they go through a single reset or something like that, this is where we're on track to do right now. And the first 1 million is the tough one, but we're just on that edge right now in Instagram. But we already, like I said, we already have a couple of million people.
So you're already like famous on TikTok, like, you know, it's super trending on TikTok, and like I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity already. Like the way you're healing people, like the way you've impacted people's lives in a positive way, if I have to say it, right? Lot of things happening, right? So it's just not about fascia maneuver. It's how you could, you know, take control of your own self, heal. Like, you know, the idea behind these podcasts, again, Gary, as I mentioned, is, you know, towards helping people heal. So how do you think, you know, in perspective of anxiety, depression, what's all going in the world right now? So, you know, how things are helping?
So the world's at an all-time crisis. We're the largest health crisis in the history of humanity, or recorded humanity as we know it. Disease, dysfunction, divorce, mental, physical, is at its all-time peak. People are dying younger than they ever have. And so we're in the health crisis, but we don't yet realize that we're in it from a global perspective. So the reason why that we're in this health crisis is because people have lost the basic elements of what keeps a body healthy. These were traditional things that were passed down through generations, through the mothers and to the wives, and they were the caretakers. So if you go back in history, all across the world, regardless of culture, 80% of the healthcare was done by the community itself, and 20% was done by the doctors or the practitioners. And we flipped that role where less than 20% in the community and 80 to 100% is done by doctors and practitioners. So what this focuses on is a basic premise of belief. The belief that I can take care of myself, and the belief that my body can heal. Those are the two things that we're radically impacting right now. The belief that the body can heal is something that like, for example, if I was to put a Band-Aid on you, that Band-Aid doesn't heal. If I'm to do a surgery on it, the surgery doesn't heal you. If I was to give you a medication or a supplement, they do not heal you. Your body heals you. Those things give your body space and time. And so it's changing the narrative of what healing really means. And healing has also been as an implied position that you get to. but it's not a position to get to because we're always in a state of change. Our bodies are either we're growing, we're anabolic, or we're dying, we're catabolic. And we have this thing called homeostasis, which is actually a fallacy. It doesn't exist. There is no homeostasis in the world. My cells are either rejuvenating or they're not, and both of them have an effect that happens in the body. So the first things first is fascial maneuvers is simple, basic movements that we can do that engage the fascia, which is the most dominant organ of the body, and it works with the brain and the musculoskeletal system to help the body rebalance itself. When the body needs healing is when we're out of balance. And so what we're doing is giving people the tools or the ability to put their body back in balance. And the biggest part of doing this is the belief that people can do it themselves. So if you come to us as a practitioner, Manvinder and us work on, and myself work on you, you're going to believe that this therapy works. You're going to believe that we could do it and we're really good. But it disables your own beliefs that you can, because we can do it better. So the idea is, instead of practicing, and this is why we no longer take patients or clients, is that we will show you how to do it. And when you're doing it, we will assist you. That way, your body, your brain, your nervous system then has the ability to believe that you can help yourself. The opposite of that is, I don't feel like I can help myself. For example, I have an issue in my body and I have a pain. I don't know why it's there. I don't know what to do. And it draws up a feeling of feeling helpless. And we know that the placebo is the largest effect on human existence. Yeah. We've demonized it. We said, placebo, is that really a placebo? We've made it bad, kind of like conspiracy theory, but it's all a placebo. If you believe it will work, it will work. If you believe it won't, it won't. It doesn't matter. And we have so much evidence to prove that to be true. So what we want to do is take simple things where people can build their belief. We don't expect people to believe that if they have stage 4 cancer, that they can heal themselves right now. But if they believe that they can get themselves out of pain and they reduce their stress, and they do that every day, then over time, what happens is the body starts to naturally heal. If they're removing the stress, and then they start to believe that they can heal their body. And we're just giving people a bridge from where they are right now to a spot where they can start to feel confident that they can help themselves.
Amazing. So in that question, Gary, thanks again for answering. But towards that question, you talked about fascia maneuvers. So my first question, or like the people who are joining new, their question would be, I'm doing this on my body. How come it's affecting my mind? What's the mind-body connection there?
So I'll let Manvinder go into the technical details as you dive into the podcast, and I'll stay at the surface level. But basically, the beliefs that our mind is the computer is the problem. This has 100 billion nerve endings. My fascia has an interstitium, which is a brain, which has 100 trillion nerve endings. Nerve endings are like horsepower. So basically, your body is got 1,000 times more horsepower than brain. And that's just at a simple metrics. That's assuming that everything's equal. But I'm going to say it's like 100 million times stronger. But we can at least draw that one analogy. So if we have a malfunction in the body, like we learn to stand, walk, and move through what we call synaptic optimized programs. What that means is it takes me a long time to learn how to pick up a cup, pull it to my mouth, and drink. It takes usually about 7 years to do that properly. But once I do it, I should have it for life. Now, my problem is I'm 54 and I still stumble over me every time. So somewhere I didn't learn as a kid. So these programs are called so we don't have to redo it. As we're young and we learn how to do the basic functions that provide our subsistence here, and those programs are hardwired into us. But if all of a sudden I hurt my shoulder, then I have to pick up and to go like this. I have to lift up or use my other hand to drink. Now that's a modification to an automatic hardwired program. That was what causes distraction for the brain, or the brain has to use a lot of energy to do that. So this is every tightness you have, every shoulder pain you have, every toe pain or ear pain or neck pain that you have means that your body has to move differently. So when we remove the basics of the pain and we let the body flow, then the brain is able to connect more of what the body's saying to our conscious awareness.
All right. So actually, before moving on to what we actually do, I just had this question since you talked about self-healing. So the difference or the different perspective, like, or the narrative that has been set over the years that, you need to go to a practitioner. And the mind always thinks that, okay, I cannot heal myself. Maybe I'm doing this wrong. So like as a newcomer, like everyone would think, okay, maybe I'm doing this here, but Gary does here. Like, could be anything, could be any sort of movement, could be any sort of thing. And like, okay, he does it this way, but maybe I'm doing it different. But I've seen your podcast where you've mentioned that everyone's body is different, and you need to learn how to adapt to that. So I'll try. Yeah, I'll let you know.
Right. It's really simple when you talk about this, but you're talking about a tactic versus an intention. If my intention is to heal my body and I turn like this, that's more powerful than is my hand over right? Did I get far enough? Did I pull hard enough? And so this is where, because we've been taught that things have to be precise in order for them to work. But what we haven't been taught is we haven't been taught to set proper intention into the work that we're doing. And, coming from India, there's a lot more of mindfulness in activities. Like the Western culture here, we get up, we eat, we work, we sleep, we have vacation, and then we die. In the Western or the Eastern cultures, there's more of a lineage of having an intention and a value and a reason why I'm doing things. So Western culture has been the devolution of culture, in my opinion, because we have taken away out all the soft aspects, all the planning, all the intentful aspects, the ritual and the pleasure. Our ritual is work. And so it's just basically going back and putting that back into our daily routines that makes this all work.
Just adding to what Gary said, it's the intention that really matters the most, and your beliefs. Because we've had a lot of people who go through the movements, but they're not holding a belief. Or even if they do the movement perfect, and they're even going further than we have, if your belief isn't there, it doesn't affect the body in the same way.
Absolutely. That's what I believe, that people are even reluctant to start because they've been following that, I cannot do it myself. So before even starting, the session, or at least trying this out, probably you should have a good or a clear intention to heal yourself. Like, as long as you believe in self, probably, nothing would help.
So belief is not a static, okay? I have a belief that I can get up and do the movement. Then I have a result, so that I confirm the belief. I have a belief that that movement will make me feel better. Then I get a result, I feel better, but maybe not the first time.
Not the first time.
And sometimes people go like 10, 15, 20 times, they don't get a result, and then they go, oh, now I get it. Now I believe if I could feel better, I believe I could remove a dysfunction in my life. Now I do it. So it's like building ladders. It's building a trust relationship with our bodies again, because our brain has been dominant, saying this is the way it is, and the body's had to capitulate.
Absolutely. Amazing. So, Manvinder, actually, so since you're here, like, how do we start? You are, as Gary mentioned, you're well aware of the body and the connection, and so why don't you just help us understand?
Let me make the introduction. Okay, so
okay, sure.
Yeah, so because he's going to take over the podcast here. Out of the studying of the human body and all the systems and how it relates to the energy practices that we acknowledge, Manvinder has been studying this in detail, creating the language of fascial maneuvers, because each movement in itself is actually a mudra or a position, and it's actually a language. So Manvinder's been dissecting the language of fascial maneuvers and knows more about it than I do. So that's why I wanted to have this part of the podcast, for him to get into the depths of it, how it connects to energy, how it connects to meridians and stuff like this, because there's no one else better on the planet to do this. He was one of the people that we trained. So he's been doing this almost as long as Jason has. And he's dove into it deeply. And we spent a lot of our time talking about it. But I try not to get too far into the details, because my job is to push it out there into the world. But you're talking to the expert right now.
Amazing. So, Manvinder, yeah, I mean, all All right. Gary, before you go,
Yeah.
two things. You always talk about how body's dehydrated and how we could heal with diatomaceous earth. But the question here is, in India especially, the first question when I suggest someone is like, that's a plant food or that's a chemical. Like, why do we want to take that chemical in?
Well, I mean, I don't have to convince people. The best thing they can do is Google 31 evidence-based reasons to use diatomaceous earth, and all the evidence is there. All the background is there. So I would encourage people to go and take a look at that, rather than to try and convince you. Basically, the basic premise of it is diatomaceous is 80% silica. Our body is predominantly silica. When we are younger, we have more silica than we do calcium. As we get older, the calcium balance goes. When we calcify, it's just like what it means. It means that we move less, we're harder. And that's what happens as we get older, but it doesn't have to happen. So that's why diatomaceous earth works, but you could use silica from horsetail, you can use silicon dioxide. Technically, you could probably just eat sand, and it would have the same net effect on the body. But the whole idea is that diatomaceous earth is something that already works. It's out there. It has diatoms in it, which clean out the small intestine. But again, Manvinder knows more about this stuff than I do, to be honest with you.
Perfect. All right. Before I let you go, what's the movement of the day you want to suggest people for today?
The real simplest one is the one that we use to just sync up. I want to teach you something in 6 breaths. You can put together.
Sure.
So let's take him and put your right leg. You're seated or standing, but you're in the standing. So take your right leg, put it over your left.
Yeah.
Take your right arm, put it underneath the left armpit, and the left arm on top. Turn the head to the left and the body to the right. And we're going to sync together. We're going to do 3 breaths in the mouth and 3 through the nose. So 3, 2, 1, breathe in. 2, 3, to the nose. 2, 3. So that movement there has the highest impact on the largest number of people, because the reason why we are sick is because our energy is not balancing with each other. When it does, our bodies naturally heal. That's enough. That brings our body into a healing mode within 6 breaths.
Wow.
Perfect.
And I'll let you, Gary, let you know that I've been doing this practice since the first time we had a discussion, and it's been almost 3 months, and I am a different person. I feel lighter. It's more calmer. I've always been calmer, but it's a different, how do I explain in words? But I'm a different person.
That's
all
awesome.
Thanks to you guys. All thanks
Ask him about the energetic practices and where this comes from, because your audience is really going to want to know that.
Amazing. All right. Thanks again, Gary. Much appreciated.
No problem. How do you feel after the sync up? Do you notice?
Pretty good, pretty lighter. Here, I could feel it here. But yeah, I'm feeling good.
Yeah, so the main reason why we do that is, wherever you came from before you came here, whatever we were doing, there's a lot of emotions and energies. And so normally it would take our bodies maybe about half an hour to sync up. If you imagine yourself walking with somebody, eventually your strides start to sync up, and it takes about 30 minutes for our bodies to sync up to each other. But doing this maneuver, it gets us there in 6 breaths. So we're able to, push away any energies that are not needed.
It does make sense. It does make sense when you talked about walking. Yes, I always, I'm this person, I match lines or feet when I'm walking. So my mind automatically goes there, okay, we are not in sync or something like that. I mean, just for fun, when I'm alone, I'm just walking.
Totally.
Okay. And I see how many times you're syncing up.
Right.
So it does make sense. It does relate.
And there actually are experiments, I don't know if you've seen online, where they take a bunch of metronomes and you put them in a room and or pendulums, and start them all at different rates, but eventually they all start swinging at the right rate because it's the same energy in the room. So we found that doing the sync up like that, it's really good to do before a meeting, or if you just came from something that was really frantic, or you're about to have a conversation with a friend. We try to do it before everything, even before we eat. We'll do a sit because it calms the body down, and you'll digest the food a little bit better. And it's just the little things that we're not always thinking about. I feel like once you start opening up your fascia, your brain has more ability to process and perceive more, which is probably what you've noticed over time too, is once your body's more calm, you actually have more space to do the things that you're supposed to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. Again, thanks, Manvinder. But like as Gary mentioned, you're more like the right person to speak about it. So I would like to hear. I mean, I have no question. Probably I'll, once we get deep into it, probably I'll have more questions to ask. But I'll let you go.
Yeah, so you asked about kind of fascia and how we can have a better picture of it or what it is in the body. The best way I can describe it is if you picture our body as being like a gel inside. So our bones are actually sitting and floating inside of this gel. So are our muscles. And we have a common belief that our bones are actually what creates structure in the body. But in our body, most of our bones actually don't touch. They float inside of the fascia, and our muscles, nerves, tendons, ligaments, everything is actually interconnected by the fascia. It's kind of in between everything. And it's the connecting element that it often gets missed in Western medicine. So the brain dominance is really what we get taught a lot growing up. So we think that, the brain is the thing that's driving. But what, in our belief, fascia is almost like it's like the motherboard in the computer. It's the thing that's connecting everything, sending all the signals, processing the emotions, the trauma, and it's very much connected to how we experience pain and especially emotion. So there's a common thing that happens a lot. I had a friend of mine who I was helping, and his arm was like going numb. So I did just a couple quick movements, just some torque. So we'll go into a little bit later how the mechanics work and the torque, but I just did a couple simple movements, and he literally was like, "Oh my God, you brought my arm back to life." But as that was happening, he was feeling all of this new energy, sensations coming through his arm, tingling, things that he hadn't felt before. And as that was happening, he started having flashes of memories that came to him about when he injured this arm, how it happened. And it went back to when he played hockey as a child and he got hit against the boards. It was a very vivid memory came. And so having experiences like that, it teaches us that the body is actually very interconnected. And so our emotions or even our memory exists throughout our whole body. It's not just up here. So even me growing up, I kept having this question, what is consciousness? How is it in the brain? I kept thinking brain, brain, brain. But the more and more work we do, and you may even notice through doing fascial maneuvers, a lot of memories and emotions will come up. It's usually related to the part of the body that you're touching. And a good way to get a better understanding of this is if we look at Chinese medicine, which actually originated in India, but because of its ability to be practiced was kind of hindered and it wasn't allowed to be practiced in the same way, it grew in the other areas surrounding India. So it got known as Chinese medicine, but it was born from the same place that Ayurvedic medicine came from, but they kind of got split up across the way. So if you take and you combine a little bit of Chinese medicine, a little bit of Ayurvedic, and you take all the different healing modalities, bring them together, you see that as actually one system. So in Chinese medicine, they view the organs as being connected to your emotions. So each organ has a specific emotion that is tied to your liver, is for anger. And so usually people who have been holding a lot of emotions inside, that associated organ over time gets more constricted in the fascia. It gets tighter and tighter and tighter. So as we release those emotions, the body actually begins to shift. And so that was a really interesting element for me when I started diving into it, is realizing okay, there's a whole other component that's connected to healing the body, which is the emotional layer. And that is all very much connected to our fascia, because as we're talking about, our beliefs and perceptions also affect, how we see things in the world. So when we're coming into a room and if we're holding an emotion, everyone else feels it, but they may not know why.
Yeah.
So they may not even know that for me, a lot of times when I wasn't as aware, I would be is it my anger? Your brain starts trying to create a narrative around it. And that's what the brain is really good at, is constructing narratives. It takes in It takes in all the information and all the input that we have, and it builds a story out of it. But that story may not always be correct. It's just taking in the input and putting it in. So a really common thing that happens is when we're working with somebody, we'll ask them to check in with how they're feeling. And they'll come in with, say, like a sore shoulder, and we'll ask them, how you're feeling about it. And then the brain right away gave us a huge narrative of like, oh, well, I was working long hours yesterday. I was doing this and that. So we try to construct a story around why it hurts. And me as a practitioner or someone who's helping, I could take that information and be like, okay, that could be true, but maybe it's these other things. And so in terms of how we view the body emotionally and energetically, our shoulders are connected to support. And depending if it's the left or right side of the body, which is masculine or feminine, it'll give us more indication of, oh, maybe this is connected to masculine energy. So left side of the body is feminine. So if their left shoulder is a little bit low like this, it could be actually from a lack of support, feeling emotional support, or maybe even through mother figures, or a lack of that energy and not feeling the support over time will cause the fascia to slowly constrict. So they might say like, oh, I worked a really long day yesterday, but it's like, oh, well, like, what's your relationship with your mother like, and then all of a sudden the layers start coming off. So,
Wow. There's something like really, really new to me. And this is the first time, I've listened to many other podcasts by Gary and you guys, but this is the first time I'm, hearing about association with this particular, like the way you described, right? So it's amazing. Can I ask you a question here for like basically two, but the first one would be, how did we know that this is, the fascia that's around this? Because it has been like this since ages, but no one actually put this forward. And, the people were not aware about this until now. Like, so, or maybe they were aware, but there were very few people. So how come this particular, if I have to say exploration, I wouldn't exactly say exploration, but how did we, find out that, this is fascia and this needs to be worked on? Because every time there's a pain, you either go, you see tissues, you go see, if there's a muscle pain or whatnot. But about fascia, this is like the first time into, if I have to say, wider known audience. And, how come that evolved, or what changed? How come you guys come to know, okay, this is this? And the second question is, I also have a dislocated shoulder, probably since you mentioned, I will talk more about it. So I'll wait for that, but I just wanted to put it forward since you talked about shoulder.
for sure. That's a really good question. I think there's two parts to this. One is that it's actually a really old ancient practice that got forgotten over time. And so right now we're going through a large shift in consciousness. And so our belief is that as our consciousness increases, everyone on their own timing comes to a realization that there is something more and that there is another way to heal the body. And I think personally, I got to that point where I was doing, hours of yoga a day just to, resolve what was going on in my body, because I was, sitting at a computer for long hours, my hands and my back, everything was slowly going more into pain. And internally, I knew that if I was going to somebody else to fix me, eventually there's going to be a moment where I'm not going to have that ability to do that. So it kind of created a search in my own mind, like, okay, there has to be another way to do this. So just through experimentation, I started finding new ways to release things in my body. And this was actually before I even met Human Garage. So I kind of, twisting and doing things a little bit differently, taking what I knew from yoga, but then it got me to a point where I was feeling good, but then I was still in pain. And I noticed that when I would stop doing it, those things slowly came back. So,
Okay.
and so that is an indication to me of something that is working, but it's not actually healing the body. It's more like I'm putting a Band-Aid on it continually. And so as I started understanding that and playing with my body more, I started realizing that there's a couple things that I've done. Like one of them is our torque techniques. Torquing is just basically taking your fascia and counter rotating it. So if you were to put a hand, on an arm and spin it in one direction, and your other arm goes the other way, it actually allows the fascia to unwind. Because in our body, everything is like a spiral. In the universe, everything shows us in spirals, like the golden ratio and pi and everything. So our DNA is a spiral as well. So when you actually do any type of counter rotation, which you see like in Total Twisted, we're actually counter rotating the body in different positions, like the head's going one way, body goes the other way.
Yeah.
So when we do this, yeah, it's like taking a rag and squeezing it out. And so over time, we actually constrict. We get, when people get older over time, their posture kind of starts going like this. So once we started unwinding it, you have a different, you have a different feeling in our body. So that's something that I kind of came to on my own, not understanding, like I didn't know it was fascia.
Okay.
I was like, I had an issue with my hips, so I did like a rotation just by one hand. I wasn't even counter rotating. I was spinning my leg. I was taking the skin and twisting it, and it's good. I was like, okay, this is relieving a lot of pressure in my body. And as I did that, I had this weird perception that I could keep spinning and I keep spinning. And then in my brain, I'm like, okay, well, a muscle technically can't spin around my bone like this. That's weird. Like, you know what I mean? So I held a belief that I was very open. I wasn't like, oh, this isn't the way our body's supposed to work. Because if I held that belief in my body, I probably wouldn't have been able to reach the same result. So having an open mindset, I was just open to play to see what happened. And what happened was really amazing. Just from like 2 minutes of doing a slight little torque on my leg, I kind of stood up and I was like, wow, this feels like how I feel when I do 2 hours of yoga, but I did this in like minutes. And so that all of a sudden sparked something in me, was like, okay, I need to search for this more. And then, maybe a few months later, I met Human Garage, and through some friends and connections, as it was very synchronistic, it just kind of happened. And I did the first couple of maneuvers with Gary. We went to Lions Bay and he showed me some movements. And all of a sudden the light bulb went off and I was like, oh my God, like I was doing something very similar. And Gary's like, yeah, Fascial Maneuvers. You just didn't know what you were doing.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it happens in everyone's life that you do something, but you're not aware of what you're doing, like the right terminology or at least the procedure. But okay, this probably works for you. Like when you're curious, when you try, or when you're curious, when you want to do things and you try out things, that, okay, this is working, this is not working. At least, you'll make that differentiation and you'll understand what works for you and what not. But sometimes, people don't have the right terminology, right support, right, way forward to go ahead with that. And I'm glad you found, Human Garage, and I'm surprised how that connection was. And I'm a strong believer in connections, and I believe, whatever happens, it's all meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just being open to those things makes a big difference, and it allows those things to enter into your life. So that was another strong belief I had, is when I started clearing out things that didn't align, I started making room for other things to come in. And a lot of it is understanding the spiritual aspects of it. Because in Western medicine, fascia is something that has been known, but it's known in a very mechanical way. Like if you take, like, I don't know if anyone's ever like cut a steak or like chicken, there's kind of like this white webbing and lining that's in between everything. That's really our fascia. But in the Western world, we're used to seeing it in something that's not alive, and that it functions really differently. And so when we're alive and functioning, our body and even our bones act very differently. Our bones actually are very bendy in our body, but we're used to seeing them when they're not in a body and they're very hard. And so start to think of the body as being this solid object. But when we dive into the energetics and even the quantum physics, the more and more you zoom in, you're just getting space, and more space. So understanding that everything's actually energy, everything is like a bit of a vibration, allows your brain to start unraveling a little bit more, to being like, okay, well, maybe my body is a series of interconnected systems rather than being like, my muscles are actually what are moving my body. But going back to what we're talking about, is how the bones actually sit in the fascia. If you were to think of our house, a house as being a structure, inside of our body, all our bones are actually floating. So if you were to think of a house, if my roof is floating above my actual walls, then how can that be structured?
Yeah.
It doesn't really make sense. There's a couple bones that touch, there's like in a rib cage or an ear, but they have very specific functions. Everything else is actually floating. And when your bones do touch, that usually creates pain. Like if you're bone on bone, that means something's wrong, right? Exactly. You start with the tension and things like that.
So I have this, like I don't recall what they're called, but I have this and they're locked. Like, and it's restricting the movement and it creates pain, like severe pain, whenever I try it. So,
Exactly. So when there's bone on bone, it's not actually, that gives me a perception, and it should give everyone a perception that we're not really connected by our bones. There's something else that's providing the structure. And so the technical term for fascia would be called a biotensegrity. And a tensegrity is basically a structure that's built through tension. Like a lot of bridges are built with this type of architecture, where they're using distributed tension across like geometry or a structure, and that the weight, sorry, gets distributed throughout the entire thing. So our body basically follows a similar, which we would call a biotensegrity, which is the function of it in our body. And so what that does is actually creates a system that is based on equilibrium and pressure and air pressure. So rather than thinking of our body as being muscles and like getting tight, if you think of it as being like a balloon, and pressure is what actually changes it, because inside of our body is like, it's actually a vacuum, because everything's in closed system. We have pressure, like it's more like a hydraulic system.
yeah.
Outside pressure from the atmosphere, always there's about, I think it's about 15 or 20 pounds. I can't remember the exact number, but there's a consistent atmospheric pressure on your body at all times, and your body's actually pushing against it to stay standing up. So when we get tension on a certain part of our body, so if you think of like a balloon and there's something here that starts pulling me like this, in order to go back to normal, this side of the body has to tense off the body and bring it back. So wherever we have tension in our body, it's actually the opposite side that is actually pulling or causing the issue, because it's bracing. It's like, okay, if I'm constantly being pulled here and I tighten my left side of my body, I kind of will bring myself back up. And you could try this when you're walking around in a room and you're just kind of very light and floaty, taking light steps. Clench one of your fists really tightly and put it by your side. You'll notice that your body starts pulling to one side a little bit. So we started viewing the body more like a balloon, and there being zones of pressure. There's 3 zones. There's like the upper, the middle, lower zone. And pressure at any point of these zones can affect somewhere. Like, something on my foot is actually having an effect on my ear. And so the whole body actually has these interconnected, it's like a series of interconnected systems. And so we use triangles a lot when we're working with people. It's like, okay, if there's a problem on this shoulder, it's probably also connected to the hip on the opposite side, because the body crisscrosses. There's a lot of X patterns that happen in the body. And so rather than thinking of like, oh, my shoulder's hurt, I'm just going to work on the shoulder. It's like, okay, well, maybe there's something actually pulling from my hip. And that hip is actually being affected by my opposite knee. And then that opposite knee goes to my opposite foot. So it kind of,
like
you triangulates a little bit. And so that's why the fascial maneuvers are so powerful, is that when you get into a movement, we're actually treating the whole body rather than focusing on one specific thing, which is a popular technique like in physiotherapy. If you have a bad knee, it's like, okay, we're going to work on your knee today. But it's disregarding the holistic nature of the body and realizing, okay, but what's actually pulling me? So if I was to focus on just the problem areas, and we tell this to a lot of people who do the maneuvers often, because people will come in and be like, oh, like, my back hurts, or for instance, your shoulder hurts. If I only give you movements to work on my shoulder, the whole body now has to adjust and adapt to that, right? So that isn't really the way we like to view it in our philosophy. So what we like to say is fascial maneuvers are actually a movement philosophy. Once you understand the philosophy and how the mechanics work, you can apply it to any type of movement process. And the main attributes are that we are a system with pressure and equilibrium. So viewing the body as more of a balloon, and counter rotation, because everything widens the body in a spiral fashion. So if you were to take any movement process like yoga, for example, which is one of the most ancient practices, but when it came to the West, it got changed and altered a little bit to mean it kind of got dumbed down, if we're to say that. So a lot of the more advanced aspects of it got removed, and those aspects actually involved a lot of counter rotation, where, there's like a tree pose can be like, with your leg up, but the original form, you're like twisted and your head's turned. And so as those things got taken out of society, a lot of our movements became very X and Y. The rotation got removed out of it.
Basically, they wanted to, how do you say, adapt it to an easier version.
Yes.
So that's the hardest part. Got faded away, and then like it's a common technique now. Okay, you just do a tree pose, but there's no movement in that, like a simple standing tree pose.
Exactly. Then over time, it's like a language. If you don't teach the next generation what's going on, after like 2 generations of knowledge can get lost very quickly.
Got this lost. Yes.
So that's one thing that in my own personal research, I was diving into the original forms of yoga, and if you go further and further back, you actually reveal more of the spiritual layers and how like the breath is very much connected, and why breath work is so powerful, because that also has emotional release.
Yes.
Like in yoga, we have different asanas, right? And each one of those is it's like a letter in an alphabet. And so when I started seeing all the asanas in different positions, and they're affecting the body in their own way, it showed me that this is like its own language.
Yes.
Once we understand the language of the body, we can start actually changing how it functions. So my viewpoint is that it's almost like an operating system. And if you understand how the operating system works and how the code functions, then you can cause certain effects to happen in the body that you were not aware of before. And so a big aspect is realizing like everything's connected. There is the physical aspects, but also there's the energetic layers. And for a lot of people, when you mention energy, they're like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. They haven't directly experienced it, but our emotions are what exist on that layer of that plane. And same with our consciousness. Our consciousness and our thoughts don't really sit in the physical world. They're sitting in a place that's, in a higher dimension, as you could say. So when we're doing fascial maneuvers, we're actually affecting multiple layers that are happening at the same time, which is why it provides such a powerful release. Where if you were to take another movement process, it's like you're getting one dimension of it out. If I'm going to talk therapy, I'm getting my emotions out, but I'm not resolving where they sit in my body. So if I have a lot of anger and I'm just talking out my anger, but I know in the background that, my liver is actually connected to it. And if the fascia around my liver is really, constricted, if I go and I resolve just my emotions, but I don't do anything to my body, over time, the pattern just comes back, because it's a pattern that we create, and it's a habit. So that's one main reason that why we actually have a practice that interconnects everything. I mentioned that before, is if we to combine all the practices together, which is very similar to what we teach in our 28-day reset programs or the 7-day resets. We're slowly building the belief and the ability for people to, not just breathe, because it is breath work, it is a meditation. We are actually bringing your perception into it, because now you're becoming aware of your thoughts, your emotions, and after a movement, you might be totally twisted for the second time, and all of a sudden you have a big release, and then like a memory may come up from a traumatic moment. So many things can come up, and if we're not thinking about it, we may not realize what it's doing. But the second or third time, you might realize that, these things are connected.
Yeah.
So holding the perception that our body is actually connected to our emotions, is connected to our thoughts, it creates a really different way for us to actually move around in the world. And even just function when we're just around other people. Like I mentioned before, if I'm really clear and say I did a bunch of movements, because I've noticed that, and you were mentioning before, once you do movements, you feel very clear, you're present, there's not a lot of stress in the body. When you're in that state, and I know how I feel, if I do a little bit of a check-in on how I'm feeling before I, go to a party or hanging out with friends. And this is a practice actually Jason taught me, and he does. He's like, anytime before I walk in through a door, I do a little check-in with myself to see where I'm at. And then when I walk in, if all of a sudden I start feeling, down, something different, but I didn't feel it 2 minutes ago, then I can be like, okay, that isn't mine. It's somebody else here. And
Wow.
And that starts building into that function.
I think just adding to this particular point, because a lot of people self-doubt.
Yes.
Like a lot of people actually go through that phase where they self-doubt about few things and whatnot, self-questioning, self-belief. I'm saying all this because recently I have done some sort of breath work wherein I realized that I'm more powerful than I think, and I have been as a child just to, make others happy. I've been in that particular phase where I was either self-doubting myself or, like just to make others happy. I'm like, okay, I was suppressing my own things. I'm like, that build up so strong that I reached a phase where I was like, no, I cannot do this.
Yeah.
No, I know that I could do it, but my mind was like saying me that, you cannot do it. So again, self-doubting, self-questioning. So I love the way you explain and how Jason told, but like checking your energy first and see how others' energies is impacting or, is causing.
Yeah, exactly. And like when
Gorgeous.
I first started, I had a hard time determining like what emotions were what, In our initial training, we had a small group of people. It was all in person. Now we're doing everything online, but I was like, where we were kind of trialing all the stuff that we're on now. And so we would do an exercise, which is in the 28-day reset, if you check that out. And it's called perception training. It's to train your ability to, just take notice of these things. And we did 3 simple things. As when we first started, we do a check-in, and where you check in with how you're feeling emotionally. So how do my emotions feel right now? How do I feel in my perceptions? Do I feel really clear? Am I grounded? And then how do I feel physically in my body? And so there's a couple things that we noticed when we started doing those 3 things is that the first few times it's like, okay, in my body, I feel really stiff. And then a huge narrative would come on why. Why. And so over time, as we started checking in, we started noticing that our check-ins got shorter and shorter and shorter because we started separating the narrative from the actual feeling. And that's the one thing I think was really, really helpful is just being able to tune into the feeling and disconnecting it from the narrative. Because it's like, okay, yeah, that might be true, but maybe it's something else. So as a practice of doing that over time, I went from not being able to understand, like a lot of times they're like, okay, how are you feeling emotionally? I'm like, oh, I feel really clear. They're like, no, that's a perception. It's like, oh, okay. I feel very calm. I feel a little bit of sadness. Okay, that's what I'm feeling. So a lot of times we have a feeling, but we don't know how to communicate it or connect it to a certain thing or thought because we haven't practiced it. That's not something we're taught in school very often is the emotional intelligence around it. And so just sitting with your own emotions and being like, okay, this is what I'm feeling. At first, it may take 5 to 10 minutes, but after 20 days, it's like spot on. You start to learn where you are at. So that's a way to train yourself to be able to check in faster. Because if you haven't done it for a while, when you go to check in, it might be confusing. You might be like, I don't really know what I'm feeling.
I was actually about to ask you, right? A lot of people might try and they're like, I have these feelings, I have multiple feelings, but how do I distinguish what is what? Like, how do I focus on, what needs attention right now? Like, how do we do that? Like, I did read or saw a video about holding your breath for longer and see which part of you is constricted to see, that particular part needs attention. Was it something?
Yes, it's something else. That's a good way to find physically where the body is too. Like for me, meditation was one aspect where it allowed me to, because we have a lot of stress in our life, and if we're constantly experiencing stress, it actually reduces my ability to perceive and have a perception of what's going on in the world. It actually desensitizes our body a little bit. So if I'm really, really stressed out, and if I have like a little bar of like how I can feel something, if I have stress in my body, I might not feel something until it gets to like the maximum point. Oh, I have this huge pain in my body. But all the little subtle things that are going on, they get blocked out from stress in our life. So when you do the fascial maneuvers, even just the 15-minute stress reset, that takes away a huge chunk of stress that's in the body, usually around 70 to 80%. And that actually allows us to feel what we actually are already feeling. And so a lot of times what happens when people first start doing the maneuvers is we start peeling away those layers and then new things pop up. You start seeing like, oh, now my back hurts, this hurts and this hurts. But it's like, those things were always hurting, but you just didn't feel it. Because all of these other things are higher priority right now. If you think of yourself when you're in pain, it's really hard to focus on certain things, especially if it's extreme pain. Like that becomes your huge focus of, okay, how do I get pain? How do I get, you go into survival mode, really. And it's really hard.
Okay, I think Yeah, sorry, good.
I was just going to say, it was really hard to go into like intellectual thought if you're being distracted by all these little things in your body. So
Yeah.
that's one way to actually tune in more, is find ways to take stress out of your body. And fascial maneuvers, I've found, is one of the best ways to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just saying that it's similar to your priority list. Like, you have a priority list and you need to get that work done. But all the other priorities are still waiting until you fix that priority and then you jump on to the next one. So as you explained, probably fascia, once you start doing the fascia movements, you'll start, checking those off like, okay, this is fixed, and then go through one by one and at least have a clear perspective of what all needs attention.
Exactly. And another way to view it is like an onion. The onion has all of these layers.
Different layers.
So our fascia is built with all of these different layers. Each one of our organs has its own layer, and that layer interconnects the whole body. So even though the liver is here, it has a place in your body, but it actually interconnects everywhere. Like in Chinese medicine, we call them meridians, which is just the flow of energy or prana in your body. And so in Western medicine, we have a viewpoint like, oh, if something's wrong with the liver, let's go to the liver and let's fix it. Chinese medicine is like, okay, there's actually a blockage of flow of energy to it. How do we address that? So that's what acupuncture is. Acupuncture is just sending chi or prana to certain areas where there's a blockage of flow. And what we have found over time is when you start doing fascial maneuvers, it's basically like performing acupuncture to yourselves. Because if we break down what acupuncture really is the needles are really an antenna for energy to flow into your body. So if you think of me needling my arm at the specific points, they have very specific points where the energy flows. But if you think about it as it's drawing energy into my body at these places where I might be blocked, what it's doing is when there's a needle in your arm, it's actually drawing your attention and focus right there.
Activating those particular points.
Exactly. So as we breathe, we actually are focusing energy to wherever those points are. So we can perform the same thing as if I hold the intention, like you're saying, and I tune into the body and I focus on certain points and I just breathe. It has a very similar result because I'm actually allowing flow to move in there. So rather than having a physical intrusion like a needle going in, through the fascial maneuvers, we found a way to internally affect what's happening.
Okay.
And we always twist and we always breathe. So what happens is we increase the pressure. When we twist, it's like twisting a cloth. Yeah. So you're basically squeezing like a toothpaste tube. We're squeezing all the pressure. So if there's anything that's blocked, when we breathe, it's kind of opening it up further and further. So it's a more natural way, we feel, for allow the body to find its own way to adapt, rather than say something like a chiropractic session, which is very forceful. And it's like, it works, but then you have to go back and you got to continually go back. If you're fascia, like here, if you think about my shirt and I twist it like this and I constrict and I keep twisting and I keep twisting, my ability to raise my arm now is like shorter. It's like it's being pulled down. So I can't really move it that much. So if I unwind the fascia around there, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can move more. It's like, okay, so was it the shoulder that was tight or was it everything around it that was tight? And so for instance, in chiropractic work, you might get an adjustment that brings you back. But because the fascia that's around it is tight, over again, it's tight. It simply comes back. So that also shows us that our body has memory as well. It will revert back to wherever it was before. So what we have found is if you actually take stress out of the body over time, it'll actually allow the body to adapt into being out of stress. Because we're constantly in stress, especially in this world now. We're always in stress. So we've actually built ourselves to be in a habit of stress. Yeah. And so it usually takes about 28 days to break a habit and form a new one. It's about 14 days perceptually and 28 days for the whole body. So if you were to do fascial maneuvers or any type of practice that helps reduce stress out of your body for 28 days, you'll notice a huge shift. Rather than continually falling back to the old pattern, your body it's like installing a new program in your body. Mm-hmm. So that's another way to view the fascial maneuvers, is that
it does make sense. Sorry, good.
I was just going to say, it's just another way to view if you think of your trauma as like software that's in the body, there has to be a process to uninstall the software, but also install new. Because once you've made a room and you deleted all the cover, all the clutter, now your hard drive has way more space to bring in new stuff. But if you're continually full all the time and your cup is full, it just takes like one little thing and all of a sudden it's like, boom, it explodes. So that's another powerful thing we found, is that if you take your stress out of your body, if you think of it being like a cup of water, if your cup is always full, the smallest amount of stress, if I add a little bit, it overflows. If you're taking care of yourself and your cup is this full, you can actually handle more and more and more. So it'll take a longer time before it goes. And I'm going back to your previous example of you were saying that it kind of built up over time, that you were self-sacrificing yourself, right? And that's something I realized that I was doing too, just like maybe a few days ago. So I was kind of laughing when you said that.
It was last week for me.
For me, it was like maybe a few days ago. I had the same realization. It's like, oh, I'm like continually sacrificing what I want to do just to go with the group or do this or that. And that's like a whole pattern, it's like unraveling those little things. So what we realized is if you were to just address a little bit over time, it actually prevents it from building up.
Yeah.
What normally happens is there's some type of anger that happens and it's like small, and then it happens again, and it happens again, and eventually it gets so big, you're like, oh, I can't ignore this anymore.
Yeah.
There's a
breakdown pattern. Yeah.
Exactly. And so what we've done is we've developed a lifestyle where we address it right away. So as soon as you feel a little bit of stress, a little bit of anger, whatever it is, if you do something to take care of it, it never gives it a chance to actually, get to that point where it's really big. So I think that's one reason why fascial maneuvers, and not just the maneuvers, but the whole philosophy around it, it has such a big effect on people, is because it's giving them the power to do that whenever they need to, rather than waiting till it gets really big and be, okay, I got to see a doctor now.
Yeah, since you talked about the muscle memory, and you also talked about, how this fascia actually comes together. So I think, muscle memory, I could certainly relate how this trauma is stored or how the memories actually come back. So I'm speaking in terms of breathworks and all. And I've realized also people who have done fascia maneuvers, they had similar kind of, trauma release. So, all those traumas, which was probably held up since a long while, slowly starts to, how do I say, reveal itself, right?
Yes.
It's kind of a revelation that you're trying to see, okay, what probably caused me a problem? Like, you have been through that problem since so many years, but you've never realized what that problem is. And all of a sudden you do this and you're like, boom, you have this, okay, probably this is causing me the problem. This is like, I've seen so many people just, out of emotions, overwhelmed with emotions, crying and all. And just with these basic maneuvers. I mean, I'm not even talking about, doing a breath work and, having a release of, going to the oxidative process, and your brain releases DMT. I'm not sure, if that's related here as well. Like, if you do fascia maneuvers and then you have that, kind of a DMT release, like, or how does, I don't know. It's curious to know, I've seen so many people with so much emotion. Like,
Yes.
How?
Yeah. It's interesting that you brought that up, because we recently did a breathwork session here with the team. We had someone visit us and he did a session for us, and we asked him afterwards, like, how is it different doing it with us than with other people? And what he said is because we all have incorporated this into our lifestyle. We're addressing our emotions. We're doing a lot of movement. We're just taking care of ourselves in real time rather than, waiting. So the main thing that he said is that we were able to reach the deeper states much faster than somebody else would have. So rather than taking 40 minutes to get to that state of releasing DMT, it's like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Like, it's much more instant because there's less friction to work through. There's less things. But even with us, everyone still has things that come up. There's a lot of stuff that's really deep from our childhood, or, a lot of it starts when we're young and a child. And trauma, a lot of times people think as being this big thing, like it's a car accident or an injury, but it could be such a small thing as when you're 5 years old, you were about to do something you loved, that someone told you, no, that's bad.
Yeah, that's reserved and that's registered in your mind. Yeah.
Exactly. And that stores for a long time. And then now that changes the way you function in the world. So that was one thing that was really interesting, is just knowing that, getting that reflection from the practitioner who was teaching us the breath work. It was like, oh, it's very different. There was way less resistance for you guys to just go in and be very, there was less kind of tense. We just got there very quickly. So there definitely is a connection. I think it allows you to tap into those higher states much, much faster. Similar to like, when you're dreaming at night, or what we had, Brain Mechanics was a company that was doing some research with us like 1 or 2 years ago, and they were actually looking into our REM sleep and how fascial maneuvers affect our sleep. And after doing the maneuvers, they actually realized that we're able to go into REM sleep faster and stay there longer than somebody who wasn't there. You know, rather than taking a couple hours, you got there really quick, and you were able to stay there longer. So I think it just removes a lot of the resistance that you naturally.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I recently, as I was talking about the last breath work, I had someone like more reluctant, and they were actually trying the breath work for the first time, and it's like, I know my body would resist it, and my body would, like, my mind would shut off, and I won't let it in. But they did go through the process, but it took more longer. Yeah. And then they had to, and at the end of the session, they actually have to, stop their mind. So there's a lot of resistance. And since you talked about breathworks, I have so many revelations that I'm trying to learn from. And like, I'm like, no, these are so minor things, but they were kind of a trauma. And since you mentioned, everyone, probably has a trauma. And I like completely agree. Everyone in this world has something or the other. And a pretty good example, or a pretty good way the shaman actually explained it is, once you're born, the first trauma in your life is you're being separated from your mother.
Yes.
Like, because you have an umbilical cord and then you're separate. So that's your first trauma. That's why, like, that's the start of your trauma. And it connected me so deeper. Like, it's like, maybe I've never thought about it. It's just, yes, you're spending 9 months in your mother's womb and you're now separated. And, the connection is broken, but you're on your own now. So, yeah.
No, that's a great point. And that actually connects very deeply to breathwork, because when we're in the womb, we're connected to the umbilical cord.
Yeah.
And that actually is providing us breath and nutrients. But a lot of times, if you're not born to a natural birth, that cord gets cut. And that right there is the very first trauma a lot of us experience. First trauma physically coming into the world, but also in the womb. If you're a mother that is experiencing traumas and there's emotions that she's going through while carrying a baby, that baby actually can take on those traumas because you're sharing that space at the moment. So our DNA as another layer, if you look at that and your previous generations, your parents and their parents, whatever emotions are unresolved in their lifetimes usually get passed down to the next generation. And so, in like exactly what you're saying, we're born with all of these deep layers from even, past lifetimes, if you believe in that aspect. And so the layers are very, very deep. So you coming into this world and figuring out how you can heal these little things, those are really the lessons that we're learning in this lifetime. And I think that's another thing that astrology helps us understand, because we use astrology a lot. It's just showing us, it's a map of your lessons of traumas and how you can navigate them much more easier. In the same way that we have, the chakras from, Ayurvedic medicine that teaches us each chakra is related to an emotional center. And if you address or have a blockage of a certain emotion, like your solar plexus is your self-power and your will. And if you're someone who feels like they can't move forward in their life, all the things that they really like, someone in Ayurvedic medicine will be like, okay, well, there's a blockage in your solar plexus, whereas your throat chakra is a very a popular one for a lot of people who can't speak their thoughts. You know, we have a lot of thoughts, but if you don't stand up for yourself to say something, it actually causes a blockage in the energy that flows here. And so if you think about it as like a river that's flowing, if you have less flow here, over time, the fascia actually constricts tighter and tighter, tighter and tighter until you actually decide to open it. So the beautiful thing about the fascia is that it's a physical thing, but it's giving us access to the higher energetic layers. So in my viewpoint, it's like a bridge. It's like a metaphysical bridge. It's a physical thing that we can touch, but we can affect things on the spiritual planes and how we're connected to that as a result. So for that reason, for me, it's like really powerful to know that I can actually basically work on all of those things simultaneously at the same time, rather than just having to separate everything and be like, okay, I need to do this type of practice for this. I have to go to the gym to do this. I have to do this. If we just combine them all into one practice, it makes it a lot easier to bring it into your life and bring it into your lifestyle. So if I go to you and I say, okay, you have to go to this practitioner for this, or this practitioner for this, now you're going to do therapy here and this and that. That's a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of emotion to be peeling back. It's hard. So we found is that with the fascial maneuvers and just the general lifestyle, it gives you a chance to just peel the layers back slowly, really, really slowly. Because if in our life, like you're saying, we're accumulating all of this trauma, and then I go and have a breathwork session, it's like all of this stuff wants to come up, and it's so hard to like integrate it into your life.
Yes, there's like overwhelming emotions, and sometimes your body's not ready for those emotions unless you I don't know. I mean, even if you have that safe container, you still, cannot, you cannot still go through those multiple emotions. I mean, everyone would have a different experience, but again, you never know how much emotions you're going through. So
exactly, your capacity, right? And that's another thing I've learned about fascia is if you think about it in terms of like electrical engineering, because there is electricity flowing through our body, it's almost like a battery or a capacitor. And so if you think about it, when we have more stress in our body and our fascia is constricting, your battery has less space and less charge.
Yeah.
It's like your phone battery over time. If you don't charge it, it's just going to die faster and faster. And so with doing the fascial maneuvers, it actually increases your energetic capacity. And so if you haven't been doing a lot of work to work on yourself and you have all of this stuff deep inside, it's like if you were to take a electronic and you plug in a power adapter that's like 10 times stronger than it can handle, you're going to blow this percent.
Yeah.
No, it's not going to work really well. And so that's what you're talking about is you have this sudden rush of everything coming up, and there might be 2 or 3 things that you're like, okay, I can work through this, but the other 10 things is like, oh, that's too much. Yeah. So what we've noticed is with the 28-day reset, we actually give people a chance to just release a little bit at a time. Because one thing that I've noticed a lot is when people actually start speaking about their trauma, because that's like the first step is just acknowledging.
Yeah. Yeah, I had that question. Like a lot of people, especially since you're talking about Indian culture, a lot of people are actually into denial that, okay, there's nothing about anxiety. There's nothing about depression. That's a taboo. Basically, if I have to say, it's just because of the culture, because people in India think it's a taboo and, no one wants to talk about it. So, people think, what would others think if I talk about mental health?
Exactly.
That's where it's like, again, a limited or if I have to say a closed conversation, and that would never happen. And the denial is the first stage, and people don't proceed because they've been denying throughout their life. So
yeah, that's a really good point. There's like a saying like low ki kaunge, like what are people gonna say? And so you don't say it, right?
You don't say it.
But that shame, because there's shame around it, that prevents us from being able to talk about it. And you mentioned like community. I think that's another aspect that's really important, is that we make it okay and safe. We provide a place, whether it's in person or online, for people to share, not feel like someone's going to say something. Because at the end of the day, people are going to say something. Like, why does it matter? Like, if I just take care of me, then I'm going to be able to have more energy to take care of you and everybody else, who's in your circle. And that's one thing that was a hard time, because I've had this conversation with my parents a lot too, because, they come from that world. And like my mom especially, she's always quick to help other people, but when it comes to her, we don't really help. And I think after watching me, she realized that, oh, if I actually just take care of myself, I'll actually have more to give to other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I give like I do love deep conversations with people. So yeah, I always give this example, like, you know, if you're in a plane, firstly, and something happens, that's what they advise you to do. Like first, put your own mask, you know, be well and try to help others. You're trying to help others, neither like you're suffocating and you're, you know, out of breath, neither you can help yourself nor the other person. That way, you know, you lose two lives instead of one. While if you take care of yourself first and then, you know, try to help others, then you're trying to save you first and then try to save, you know, whoever you could. Probably you could save multiple after.
Exactly. And that makes me think of another example where it's like, if you think about your energetic reserve or your passions or things that you love as being like this cup, if you have an empty cup, am I really
Okay.
to somebody?
Yeah.
It's a disservice to me now if I'm giving to people an empty cup because they're not even receiving what I can fully give them now. And that was a big thing that I had to learn. Is like, okay, just because I was similar to you, I'm just always helping other people, but then I'm not really taking care of myself. And I come from a background in creative, like arts, filmmaking, and sound. So I was always very quick to help other people with their projects, but when it came to my projects, like, oh, I'm tired of it.
Yeah, same thing. I could still feel I'm like where I'm going. I mean, but again, that's probably something I need to work on. But yeah, similar terms. Yeah. Since you also mentioned about horoscope.
Yeah.
So, like, let's say if someone wants to start their journey, would they have to go through this horoscope or just do the fascia? I mean, how does that play a role? Like, as a beginner, let's say if I'm a beginner, I'm coming. Do I need to know my horoscope to say, okay, this is what I need to focus on?
I would say no, you don't have to. It is like a map. So it'll help you and it might accelerate certain things that you didn't know, where you would have to just come to find them out yourself. I find it's very similar to like your chakras. Some people are very in tune to it, like, oh, okay, I gotta work on my root chakra, I gotta work on my crown or whatever. Those are all, it's just a map of how your energy is flowing. And so that's the way we view astrology. Is very different than the normal horoscope, which is very predictive and, oh, am I going to marry this person? Am I going to have more? The way we view it is strictly as energy and emotion and how our body processes that energy and emotion. So one way to describe it is that every sign in the zodiac has their own, we call them archetypes. So they all have their own personality and their own traits. What we found is that due to those personality traits, the way energy flows in your body is very differently. So for example, if you're a Gemini, they're known to be very much in their head. But because I have more energy flowing up here in my head, my fascia is going to constrict differently because it's all flowing up here. I get in my head, I'm in my thoughts a lot. So depending on what sign you are, it can help give you another layer that will help you get to somewhere faster, you know. Scorpio, I'm a Scorpio. So Scorpios, a lot of times, they're seen as the protectors. We're always trying to protect other people. But that would also mean is that even though I may know a truth, I might not say it to you because I'm afraid of hurting you, because I'm trying to protect you. But what happens is because I'm not saying it, that'll create a blockage in the throat chakra. And so you don't have to know these things to work through it. You might already know in the background that this is going on. But when we use astrology in this way, it just gives you a little bit of a map of where you're going and how to get there maybe faster. And you totally don't have to believe in it. And you will still get benefit from the maneuvers. But if you do like to believe in that stuff and you feel it connects with you, it allows you to dive into the more emotional and energetic layers rather than, it's like having a map where you're driving somewhere. Like, if you're given specific directions, you can get there very quicker. It doesn't mean you're not going to be able to reach there the same goal, but it might speed up
Understood.
how fast you get there.
Understood. All right. So since you also talked about like, you know, Indian culture and all, I also want to, you know, let you know that I've started this. I've you know, tried to put this into practice at my family. And my mom does practice it. It's not about mental health or whatnot, but it's just a way to be, you know, to be better. Like, you know, try to be, again, like, we're not aiming. I had a word with Gary the first time. The first time, I'm like, I'm not expecting miracles. Even if I'm like 1% better than what I used to be, that's, more than enough for me. So people who are like probably looking or at least watching this podcast, you don't have to or expect miracles out of it. It's slowly, there's gonna be a change. There will be a change, and there's gonna be a change, but slow and steady.
Exactly. And it's awesome that you're doing that. I think my mom has started doing the same thing slowly over time. And this goes back to what we were talking about before. Real healing happens very slowly. 'Cause we have so much stuff that's built up and suppressed. You don't really want to release that quickly, as you've seen in like a breathwork session or something. You get this big explosion, and then you have to go back to your life and figure out, okay, how do I incorporate this? It's very similar to taking a psychedelic or like an ayahuasca journey. It's like this huge cathartic release, but then I have to go back into my life and I have to address all these things. But if you were to just do a little bit each day, it's like you took that one little journey and you spread it across, a couple months. It becomes way more manageable for me to apply it actually into my daily life. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is what causes a shift in people, is when they realize that I can take care of myself. And it brings the power back into yourself and your body, knowing that, I don't have to see somebody. And I know that if I have a pain, I can just quickly do some maneuvers, do a little bit of breath work, talk about it a little bit. It happens slowly. And then what happens is, as the body shifts, the mind shifts, your spirit shifts, everything starts shifting normal. Like, as you've seen, you feel like a completely different person.
Yeah.
And I think the best way, or maybe why your mom might be even into it, is that she saw you change. So like, something that I noticed was that when I first started doing the movements, they knew what I was doing. And so I would always come back with all this information, like, oh, Fascia is so amazing. It does this and this and that. You should really try this. And I kept trying. It's like I was trying to convince people, like, oh, you need to do this. It's really
Yeah.
But it wasn't really like, they're like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll do it. Same with my friends. I was like, oh, do this. This is such an amazing process. I had all this information. And they would be like, oh, that sounds really cool. But no one really would like jump onto it.
They're not curious, or at least like, okay, maybe they're like, okay, just because you're saying, but they're not actually moved towards it, inclined to it.
And I think this is true for anything new. When you bring to somebody, if you have to try to convince them to it, it's very hard for them to understand what's going on. And so what I noticed is, when I just started doing it and I stopped telling people, then they came to me and they were like, oh, so what are you doing?
Yeah.
Rather than me going like, hey guys, this is what I'm doing, this is cool. And then usually maybe one person will be like, oh, I'm going to try that. But if I just stayed quiet and I just did my own thing, then I waited for them to ask me. And then it was like, okay, well, this is what I'm doing. You should try this. You give them the information. So I noticed that was a big shift that happened with my family. It took a few months, but when they started seeing me change, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I want to see I want to try that.
Yeah.
So then my parents started incorporating it more into their life too. And then, it starts seeping into your circles. Because if you shift, all the people around you, they have to shift as a result, because now you're different. And so this is the one way where just one person can affect the entire community that they're in. Because now everyone who's connected to you in your world, they see a shift in you, and now their body is shifting as a result, or their perceptions, their emotions, how they deal with you. Everything changes. So we kind of have this ripple that starts happening. And like Gary mentioned in the beginning of the call, you only need to reach 1 million people to get a billion.
Yeah.
So the same thing for you is, people who are now in your network, you might have people reaching out to you and be like, hey, I've noticed you've changed. What are you doing? And this happened. I had a big experience with this, where I went back and I went to a birthday, which was from some of my friends.
Sorry, can you flap, like, can you move the flap a little? Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, so I noticed that with my friends that I went to high school with, who I haven't seen for a long time, I went back to like a birthday party or something like that. And then at some point throughout the party, each one of them came to me and they're like, oh, like, what changed? You look so different. Started listing out. They're like, are you working out? Like, what is it? And so that's where I was like, oh, wow, you really just have to commit to doing something yourself.
To do it. Yeah. I mean, the results would speak for itself, right? So Just do it and the results would speak. Yeah.
Yeah, you become the example.
You become the example. Yes.
And that's right. It's like a classic saying is like, if you are the one who's walking and creating the path, then eventually people will follow. But if you're just telling people about the path, but you're not actually walking it, then they're like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah. You're still not sure about the path, but yeah, you're just telling them. Yeah. And, a perfect example, if I have to say, is Gary himself. Right? Gary in 2019, Gary in 2020, and Gary, like, let's say 2022 and 2023. There's a lot of difference.
very.
And, like, he almost feels like rubber now. Like, the moments he,
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty amazing how he said 53 or 54 years old.
Yes, I believe so. I think he's around there. If you actually go on a YouTube channel and go back to even the 15-minute stress reset video, now he looks pumped.
Yeah, it's completely different. That's what. And I try to tell this to my dad, actually. And he's like, no, I'm already old. I cannot do things and all. So I sometimes try to give him, better examples. And Gary is one of them. Like, same age, but different body types, different perspectives. Just, I believe, is the perspective that needs to change. The narrative that people have committed to, because since that narrative has been following since ages. It's like great grandfather were doing that, your grandfather was doing the same thing, father, and like it's just passing on. And the other day, if you won't believe, I was just telling my dad, it doesn't have to pass on to my kids. I would want to be the change, at least, because you didn't take that initiative. And it's never too late. Probably you can still do that. Like whatever things you can have, like you have it in control, probably you can still work on them and then try, so that it doesn't go on. Like, my kids would not be saying, okay, my dad has it, and I would, like, for similar example, like, how do I say, diabetes in India is pretty common, and they're like, oh, my dad has it, and I'll, it's common. Even if I do anything, I'll still have it. No, you cannot. You can still at least control it. Why do you want to, walk on that particular path when you know that it's already, harmful for you, and you're just leaving, like saying, okay, it would anyways happen. Like, at least you try it and, try for yourself and see how it goes.
Exactly. That's a really good point. Is that and if you go into that a little bit further, and it could be diabetes, it could be anything, could be anything that runs in the family. We have a tendency or a belief to think that it's like a physical thing that I have to fix with a medicine. Being like, oh, if I have this, then I have high blood pressure is another common one, or thyroid is another common one. And we keep thinking like, oh, this is actually a physical thing that I need to fix. But we know that modern medicine, it provides you something like a band-aid or a fix that doesn't actually fix the root cause, but it addresses the symptoms. But we're not actually fixing what's actually going on, in the machine itself. And that actually is, like you're talking about, is a perception, right?
The perception.
So what actually is being passed on is the emotions and the perceptions. It's not the physical thing, And so because they didn't resolve it in their mind, it's got to go down to the next.
Got to go down. Yeah.
But as soon as you fix it, it goes backwards too. It goes back to them, and now they have the ability to fix it. So it goes back to this quantum view of time as being like a loop. It's not really this linear thing that moves forward. So if I'm fixing a trauma that I had when I was 5 years old, it's like I'm time traveling a little bit. I'm unraveling all the things that caused me to go there. And to the point you're talking about, Gary, it's really, and that shows that in any age, this is
at any age, exactly, at any age.
Any age. And like we have a belief that, after like 28, the body stops growing. But what we have found is that's because there's so much stress in our environment. It actually causes your body to compact over time, like compress. And so if your body shuts down, your brain's shutting down, your perceptions, everything gets slowly, then we get slower, then we start aging quicker and quicker and quicker. And one thing that we've noticed in our community, and you can even see with Gary, is you looking younger.
Yeah, it's
every year. Like every 2-3 weeks, I would send friends and like, you look younger, like what's going on,
Definitely, yeah.
And that's a really interesting perception, because that's not a common belief that we have the ability to do that. And so, you know, and that brings a whole different question, like what is aging really, you know? And if we're able to address the things that cause us to age quicker, then at the very least, we could pause time a little bit and stay at the age we're at. But what we found was you can actually start unraveling it and reversing it. So, you know, there isn't a ton of science to exactly support what we're doing because it's very new, but we're creating the science right now with all the people who are doing the fascial maneuvers. They're all having very similar results. Like,
Absolutely.
one that's common is the fascial facelift. If you were to perform that on someone who's like 80 years old, they see a benefit from it right away, you know? So there's a lot of things that can contribute to those beliefs that we have, that I found that once you start taking care of yourself a little bit, you start questioning those things like, oh, you know, maybe something else is possible.
Yeah.
As soon as you believe that like something new is possible, then your universe is going to start reflecting that in the world. Like Gary, this example a lot is Olympic runners. There was a certain time limit that was set and no one could break it. But as soon as that one guy broke it, it's like,
Okay. Like everyone, like, yeah.
like, oh, it can't happen. Okay.
Absolutely. Since you're talking about you know, how age reversal, right? So I've actually seen like examples, and I keep listening to podcasts. I've heard or listened to one of the podcasts wherein, you know, a person with diabetes and you know, probably at the worst of super high diabetic, like, and kidney failure and whatnot. So how, based upon a calorie, like a nutritional diet, following, you know, breath works, following all the oxidative processes, you know, his age at least, you know, reduced by 10 years. So that's possible. It's like not a lot of them believe in that, but it's still possible. You can control. I mean, if not at least reverse it, you could still delay it. Like, you know, how do you say, your death? You could delay your death at least to an extent where you could have that control to take care of your life, be it healthy eating, be it you know, following these processes, fascial maneuvers, yoga, whatnot. All these techniques, if you implement them, probably there's a chance that, you know, you could definitely reduce your you know, body age.
Yeah, now I feel like more than ever, because we talked about there's so much stress being on us, and when your body's in stress, it's not going to even utilize your minerals properly in your body properly. All functions get hindered when you're in the stress. So I think that's a big component that, like you mentioned, is it's not just doing the fascial maneuvers. It's not just doing this. It's understanding that everything is everything.
What works for you? Yeah.
Yeah, and like making it a part of your lifestyle is what we like to teach people. Is, you know, if you think of whatever practices, wellness practices you have, if I set aside a specific time to do them and I only do it during those times, that's not really incorporating it into my lifestyle. You know, that's also being like, okay, I'm going to set aside a certain time to do my maneuvers, which works. But if you go one step further than that, is like, if I view these as tools, then I can use the tool whenever I need it, rather than setting aside a specific time. Because for a lot of people, that becomes a burden. Like for some people who have a very tight schedule, you know, 1 hour to 30 minutes might be difficult to put together. And so what we teach people is that once you've learned the fascial maneuver, just incorporate it into your life. Like, you know, when you get up or you feel something off, just do, you know, get it to totally twist it, do a quick movement. You know, if you have a meeting that's about to happen, sync up quickly. I don't know if you've gone through the organ reset at all, but
yeah, it's my morning routine. I follow like about 45 minutes of all like organ reset and everything. It's like my everyday morning routine.
Yeah, and that's perfect, because you start your day on that frequency, and then sometimes you can end your day on that frequency. Your sleep and everything is much better. But say throughout the day you had something really stressful happen, you know, and it's in you, or say once you understand the connection of the emotions, you have all this anger in your body, you don't know what to do with it, then maybe that would be a time to just work on your liver. You know, you just do the liver portion of the organ reset, you know, you just breathe it out. And just your intention alone and the breath combined helps that emotion, rather than sitting in your body being unresolved, it helps you move it out. Like there's a couple videos They might be hard to find, but there's like Gary is doing fascial maneuvers in like the weirdest places. Like we'll be out at the supermarket, buying food or whatever at the checkout, and then we'll just quickly just breathe a little bit. So wherever it is in your life, if you feel something happen, it's like let's just do it right there. Like we'll be driving, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got to do like city traffic is a big one. When you're sitting in traffic, you're experiencing all the anger and frustration of everybody around you. And so if you're feeling really, really off, there'll be times where you just pull over to the side of the road, quickly breathe it out, and then get back. You feel grounded again, and then you're on your way. So I think that's the secret element is that it can be part of your routine, but it can be this little tool that you use whenever you need it. Like a little Swiss Army that you have in your back pocket.
Understood. Yeah. So before I actually move on to the last part of lifestyle, I had this one last question. On this particular section is you mentioned in the beginning that let's say I have pain in my left foot, right? How do I identify like what movements do I do so that I know that you talked about it could be connected this to your left foot. But how do I identify now I have a pain in my left foot? How do I try to do what needs to be done?
That's a good
question is how do I identify?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at first, if you haven't been doing a lot of fascial maneuvers and your body is really tight, it might be really hard to identify what is one because there's so many things.
Okay.
It could be your hips, it could be your knees. Our ears are also very connected to our feet as well. So a lot of times when we do an ear release, people will notice that their feet feel very different. And it's like, oh, okay, I didn't realize. So technically every part of our body is interconnected. So the best way I would say to identify it is to start doing some of the movements to reduce the stress. And once the stress is reduced,
okay.
Yeah, your fascia actually, like you mentioned, Gary, it gets a little bit more jelly and soft rather than being really hard and rigid. And so the more and more fascia as it releases, you'll actually be able to feel where it's pulling from exactly. It'll feel like a little string being pulled, and if you imagine a body as like cement, it's like the solid thing. I can hit you anywhere and you might not exactly feel it. But if you start being like this little soft jello and I pull somewhere, you'll feel like the whole thing like, oh my God, okay here. So that's one thing that we've noticed over time of doing the fascial maneuvers. If you make it a consistent practice over the course of like maybe a couple weeks or a month, you're going to be able to start feeling way more than you did before. So the biggest thing would be removing stressors from your body, but also your environment.
Environment.
The big thing is because we're always being bombarded by like chemicals in our atmosphere, in our environment. So trying to eat more organic is a big one because you're reducing the load of chemicals that go in your body. Any synthetic chemicals that we might be using, a lot of people use skincare products that have a lot of chemicals in them. So even things like deodorant, toothpaste, cosmetics, all of those things create a chemical load in the body that we have to fight. And so the more stressors that we have in our environment, the lower our perception actually is. So my ability to perceive gets affected by all the chemicals that are outside, but also inside, That's the big question for a lot of people is, well, what is stress really?
Yeah.
And so stress, the way we view it, is anything that will create pressure inside of the body as a result, because we view the whole body as being a pressurized system. So if I introduce a lot of stress in my body, it's going to create pressure somewhere in my body. And then now I'm going to have to move it out. And if I don't move it out, what happens is our body, if there's a part of your body that doesn't really move, that's very stagnant, to keep it hydrated, our body sends water to keep that area hydrated. But if I continue to not move it, that water begins to calcify carbon over time and you get really, really stiff. That's when the issues start to develop. Now my body has to move around the thing that's stuck. And so that's when you notice how everyone walks a little bit differently. And we use that as a way to just to see how someone's body is functioning and where something might be off is we'll ask them after they do a maneuver, we usually will tell someone to go for a walk because that's where your body's reintegrating. But as they're walking, you'll start noticing like, oh, someone's like this shoulder's a little bit down or this is that. And so if you just start to clue into yourself after you do some maneuvers over a 1 or 2 minute walk, you'll notice things start shifting slowly. Like at first, a lot of times if I have a big shift, my body's just super off balance. And I'm going for a walk, and I'm like, whoa, I'm on.
I could feel, I felt it a couple of times. I'm like, okay, maybe it's like I'm too heavy in my head because most of the time when we do the, how do you say, the anti-gravity and sudden have a rush. Like, okay, I feel that's the cause, but sometimes I just go here and there.
Yeah, and so what it is your body is actually recalibrating. So if you think about it as equilibrium, and say you had all of these things, like say my shoulder was off and it's pulling my body this way, and so this side of my body has to brace. Because now this side is tighter, now it's going to affect my hip, it's going to affect my foot, because everything's trying to align to center. So if I all of a sudden remove all those restrictions, then it's like, whoa, I have to recalibrate. And so just walking a little bit, it allows your body and your fascia to recalibrate. And it finds like its new home point. Now all of a sudden it's like, oh, that pull isn't there anymore. And then your bones, everything start adjusting as a result. So going back to your question is, once you start taking care of your body and your lifestyle, and even just adjusting your emotions, that actually gives you the ability to perceive what's actually going on in your body. And the way we've provided people with the fascial maneuvers, with the stress reset, the organ reset, and then there's actually the full body, the 45-minute full body routine. Those routines together, they actually adjust the whole body as a result. And we have the little things like, okay, if your feet are off, arms off, you can adjust those things, but if you're not doing the whole body stuff, those little things, they're just going to come and go. So the biggest thing I would say is just try the stress reset, try the organ reset, and see how your body feels. And you'll notice that those little pings start shifting, moving, and start going away. We do virtual classes online, and that's something in the chat happens all the time. Everyone's like, oh, my shoulder hurts, my back hurts, my head is hurting, this is hurting. And then what we always tell people is check in with your body, how you feel. Do the movements, do the maneuver, and at the end of the class, check in and see like, oh, is that even hurting now? What often happens is that you go in with a certain pain. After the class, it's gone, but then you start feeling something else. Oh, like not that here. But then your brain is like focusing on that, not even realizing that that's gone.
That is gone.
So I think just slowly, it'll start unraveling the layers. But because we have so much pressure and that's caught up, in the beginning, it can feel tough because so much stuff is coming up. So give yourself space, and time is the biggest one. And like,
basically, as you mentioned, the first step is to acknowledge that, you have this, start, believe, and do it, kind of as a practice. For a long term, at least you'll see results one by one, or slowly at least. And as Gary says, the fascia learns by itself. That's why we have that, we do that walk to reintegrate and see, how fascia could learn the new pattern, like the new walking pattern, because you've changed something and now it's learning the new pattern. So going to lifestyle, you've already touched on 2 points. One is the organic food, and then the organic like makeup or like any chemicals. So it could be anything. So how about organic food? Because a lot of people who would probably be following, and especially in Canada and US, comparatively, Canada is more expensive on the grocery side. $100 you can hardly get few things, and especially going for organic now, it's super expensive, and you don't have a lot of stores that actually do organic thing. So what do you suggest? I mean, is there an alternative, or you could still go ahead with that, but do some other measures to counterbalance?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is actually something my parents asked me because I was switching to going organic, and they kept being like, oh, it's going to be too hard, it's too expensive. There's all of these, I guess they're like hurdles you have to overcome to figure out, because one of it is that we have old patterns of like where we like to shop, where we like to go.
Yeah.
You go to those places and you start realizing like, oh, they don't.
You're comfortable.
Yeah, like I would go to like, so I was living in Canada, I would go to like Same Old Foods, and I'd look for something organic, like fruit, and like in the whole store, they only had bananas.
one section or just like a couple of things. Yeah. Just
Exactly. And they're actually, the price was not very, like, it's like, whoa, this feels very overpriced. So one thing I learned is that if you go to the places that we used to shop at and you look for organic stuff, they're usually priced very high outside of what you normally would pay. But if you go to the smaller places like smaller shops, farmers markets, you start finding stuff that is organic that is probably the same price or if not cheaper. So for me, it was one, creating a new strategy, looking for new places, and sometimes asking around people, looking for local farmers markets, and just finding and identifying the things that you want to change. Because trying to change everything at once is really hard.
it's hard. Yeah.
One thing at a time, it's going through what you have in your cupboards and realizing like, okay, let's try switching out these things and let's find a new way around it, and finding a new strategy and the things that you can incorporate into your life. And so the biggest thing too is that a lot of things that are organic sometimes aren't good for your body because they're still using some form of chemicals, but they're just considered, organic chemicals. And so what we started doing is we started teaching people how to test for if something is right for their body or not. And it's something that's used in kinesiology, which is muscle testing, where it's like you can hold something and you ask a question. And for this example, it'd be like, is this right for my body in this moment? Because it changes from time to time. Something may be not good for you now, might be good for you in a little while. So generally we'll hold and take something to practice this. You take something that you know is not good for you and you hold it and you ask the question, is this right for my body? And what you do is you hold out your arm and you have a friend put pressure on your arm or not. And so if your arm goes down right away, that usually is a strong no. But if there's strong resistance, that's usually is a yes. And that technique is used quite a lot in kinesiology. And so that's when I started learning that.
I saw Jason's video about this, but I didn't like quite relate. So to be honest, I'm like, because you're thinking in your mind. So what if I just give a random, like, I mix it up and I give it, would it still?
Yeah, your body knows. The whole point of it is to take your brain out of the equation.
Okay.
Because take the brain out of the equation, we're actually asking the body, and the body is intelligent. The fascia is more intelligent than the brain is.
Wow.
And so another one is sway testing, which is similar. So muscle testing is when you have a friend, and a lot of times when we're not clear and we're not able to do it, we'll ask somebody like, hey, can you test this? Like, I'm not sure. And you can hold it out. And usually when it goes down right away, like, okay, that's a no. The other way is that it's called a sway test. So if I hold something and I ask the same question, I'll notice that my body will either go backwards or I'll go forwards or backwards, right? And so before you do that, you ask the question, okay, tell me what a yes is and what a no is in my body. So I ask, hey, what is a yes? And for most people, a yes is forward and a no is backwards. For some people, it's different, but that's generally the way it is. And then what you do is same thing. Hold the food or the product or anything that it is. Ask the same question. And you'll generally get a forwards or a back. And that's another way to start building that skill of learning like what's actually good for you, what's not good for your body. And the big reason we're doing this is because it's really the chemicals that are in the food are really affecting our lifestyle and our ability to function the way we do. If you look back years and years ago, the same tomato doesn't actually have the same nutrients as it did now, because the way the soil is being industrialized and overused, we're not replenishing the nutrients. We're using chemicals to grow the foods. So what's happening is over time,
It's all the hybrid too.
exactly.
Hybrid too, and
Then it's super popular in places like India. Like I have a family that owns a farm and they talk about hybrid seeds and all that kind of stuff. So it's like the places that are growing our food is really important. And when I go to a supermarket, I don't really know where this apple came from.
where it's coming from. Yeah.
And it just crossed a border. It got radiated at the border, and that's that introduces its own series of problems. And so, trying to source food from where it's grown from is not always easy. But that's why things like farmers markets are really, really helpful. So, creating those new strategies. One, just knowing that how I feel before and after I eat. And that's one thing that's really difficult. If I have tons of chemicals in my environment and I go and I have like one thing that's organic, it's going to be really hard for me to see what's going on. But if I and I remove these things out of my life for maybe a month or a couple of weeks, and then I go back into it, then you're like, oh my God, I didn't realize affecting my body in this way. And so the biggest thing that I've noticed after switching to organic is I don't have to eat as much and I don't eat as often. And so because of that, I actually have to buy less food. And so over time, you actually are reducing the amount of money you're actually spending. So rather than buying like 10 tomatoes or like a bag of something that I need because it's cheap, if I just get like 2 or 3 of those that are organic, my body is getting a way better result out of it. And that perception is what it takes a little bit of time to change, especially in our family. And my parents have slowly started shifting. You know, now they're starting to look for places that, oh, okay, so this place, this is where I can get this, and this is where I can get this. And especially with produce, when I'm eating organic produce, my body needs way less. You know, I don't need to eat as much, and I don't get as hungry as often. And that right there was a big shift for me, realizing like, okay, even if the price is a little bit higher, I'm buying way less. So in the end, I've actually saved myself money.
It's kind of balance. Yeah.
It balances out.
Balance, or at least you're saving. Yeah.
You're saving in so many different ways because over time, you're actually affecting your health over time. So if I'm actually helping my body heal, I'm preventing so many things down the line that could cost me way, way more. You know, like it could be a bigger problem down the line. So if you think about it as a preventative care for your body, it helps rationalize that, oh, I'm actually doing my body a service and I'm preventing me from having to have all of these other things come up later. And so for me, it feels like I'm saving money when I'm eating organic, even though at first it may seem like the price is higher. It's a higher hit right now, but over time, you're actually saving those, go down those roads. And then the last thing I would say is just try and growing food too. You know, that's something that's being phased out, that is becoming more popular. You know, not a lot of people have gardens or even grow food. Yeah. So just the small little things here and there. And if you have friends, you know, one of my friends, he started having a little garden and he has a couple things that he likes to grow. And then if I have
maybe mutually.
Exactly. And if you have a whole community doing that, then it's just like, oh, I'll trade you some of your carrots. Here's a little bit of lettuce. And I think if you have people who are also in that lifestyle, it really helps you to incorporate that and even find places that are, you know, that are aligned with you. Because the big thing here is that if that's my belief, I'm only going to see things in my world that are going to like contribute to that belief system. So when I start thinking organic, I start seeing all the things in the places I go that are like, oh, I can use that. I don't like that. And so it's just be really slow with it. You know, if there's someone who's just trying to incorporate this into their lifestyle, don't go and take everything out of your cupboards that's not organic. Just do one thing at a time. You know, it might just be your toothpaste to start. Like, okay, I don't want fluoride or chemicals in my toothpaste. Change that one thing, incorporate that. Then it might be the things that you're drinking. You know, water is a really, really big one. For a lot of people, we're used to drinking water that actually is not hydrating our body. You know, it might be tap water, it might be bottled water. But what's happened is through the filtration process, a lot of the minerals that our body needs get taken out and they get eliminated in a synthetic way that doesn't really agree with our body. And so what happens is in a state like that where I don't have the minerals I need and I've put in water like that isn't appropriate into my body, it's a solvent. So it actually pulls more chemicals out of my body and it ends up dehydrating me even more. So along with going organic, if you can find ways to get really good water, which is
purifies or closer.
Well, purification is one aspect of it because you're removing impurities, but what happens is you also end up removing the good stuff too. So mineralizing your water and reanalyzing trace minerals, like you can get little drops that you get into your water that add minerals back in. Some people like to structure it, or certain crystals that are really good for this, like shungite is really good at filtering and also adding minerals back into your water. So there's a lot of different methods that we can apply to make our water act like the water was in nature where it was first came from. Because if you think about water that's flowing downstream and rivers, it's curving, it's extracting minerals from the earth. And then if we put it into our body in that type of format, you know, if we remove the things that are not good for us, but we keep the minerals intact, it actually hydrates our body in a completely different way. And what I mean by structure is that water has its own energetic component to it. And when it's flowing through curves, like in like a riverbank, versus a municipal water, which is going through pipes and pipe all the right angles, it's like smashing at every corner, and it actually breaks up the water so that it's not actually providing us with the same like nourishment we would have before. And there's a really good documentary about this, and Japanese scientists really dove really deep into this. I think the documentary is called The Secret of Water. And they take water and they freeze it. And when they freeze it, they were shouting different intentions of the water. Like one was anger, one was happiness, love. And when you froze the water, they all had very different structures. The shape of the water changed based on what energy was given to it. So water itself is like a crystal as well. It can absorb whatever you give it. So just like the food, if we're not taking care of that aspect of it, we can actually be doing more harm to our body. And the best place to get water is actually from your food or your fruit. So if you find organic fruit, the water that's actually contained in that fruit is in a form that was intended for us, which nature already creates. It already has a form and structure to it, which is very different than if I took water that was, from a plastic bottle.
Okay, understood. Amazing. So, and you also talked about, multiple other things like chemicals with, probably you could find chemical-free products like shampoos, like conditioners, face washes, body washes, everything. So you could probably look for that. And I think that's not that expensive comparatively. Like, because for me, what I saw was, if you go to a supermarket, the food was more expensive than the actual chemical or the organic product, at least. So organic products, I think, if you want to invest, it won't take much. You're just buying one product for one time. It's like hardly a $3, $4 difference, but you use that for a long time. So that's probably not a problem for people. But I think, getting organic foods is more of a start, like as you explained how they could do it. The other thing is, since you're talking about more focusing India, like a lot of people are into yoga. Yes. But, how do you see, people leaving this pranayams and everything and focus on this? Because like a lot of people have been doing yoga since a long time. Mm-hmm. And of course, yoga is similar. You do it for longer to see results. Mm-hmm. So what sort of correlation do you see between the two?
That's really interesting because I kind of touched on it a little bit before, was that a lot of the original forms of yoga had a lot of twisting in the body that got removed out of it. And so once you understand how the fascial maneuvers work, in terms of counter rotating the body, turning the head in a different way, you can actually incorporate this into the practice of yoga and convert yoga into fascial maneuvers very easily.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen Gary started that section wherein the tree pose was converted to something else, and then
exactly. So adding any type of rotational element back into those practices, it actually allows it to function in your body a little bit differently. And what we're really doing is we're adding rotation back into the movement. If you think about how your body walks when you're walking, your arms and your legs, everything rotates around the center axis. So rotation is part of our movement, but in a lot of movement practices, like even going to the gym or a lot of yoga maneuvers, they have the Z plane removed. You have an X and Y, like, you have a warrior pose where you're going with this, but what if you were to turn your body, turn your head a little bit? It's actually making it into a form that we would use in our everyday life rather than taking out that rotational element. So, to a lot of people who are already doing yoga, I would try the fascial maneuvers, see how your body feels. And what I noticed, what was really different is that when I stopped doing yoga, I lost a lot of my flexibility. But with fascial maneuvers, I have gained so much more flexibility. And even if I was to stop doing them at this point, I still have it. So I'm way more flexible than I ever was, even when I was doing yoga for like hours a day. So combining the two, I think, is where there's a lot of room grow and explore, because we've created a series of movements that we're giving to people, but we know that there's going to be maneuvers that people find of their own and that they invent and they create based on whatever restrictions they have in their body. You know, like for you, you might have something in the shoulder. And once you understand how the fascial maneuvers work, we encourage people to play because it's really like a dance. And so just through playing around with it, you're going to find something that we haven't found. And then, you know, just sharing that with the world, and even sharing that with us, it helps everyone else grow faster and faster. It's just like you sharing a little bit of trauma or whatever you're going through. In my mind, it shows me like, oh, this is where I'm experiencing that in my life. It helps me too.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big aspect of it, is just don't be afraid to play with the body and just to try new things, because you're not going to break anything, especially when you're working with fascia. The biggest component of it, which I didn't mention before, is that we tell everyone to move very slow. Because fascia is something that likes to move very, very slowly. You know, in the gym, we're used to moving things really quickly, but when we do that, we actually activate our muscles, and our muscles are pure defense. They're there to keep us safe and provide us when when we need to like get out of harm's way or something. But most of our movement is actually like these fine movements that we do where we're rotating our body. Our fascia is involved with all of those types of movements. So the slower that you move, the more you're actually able to release the fascia. So I would just tune into those things and see how you feel, and start incorporating the little movements. Like play around with the maneuvers, and then see if you can take a yoga maneuver and convert it into a fascial maneuver. Because really, what you're doing is you're taking it back to the way it originally was. You know, it feels like to me is I'm touching back to the ancient practices that were happening a long time ago that we got separated from.
Absolutely.
So I have a feeling that, these types of movements were done thousands of years ago, and we're just, we're remembering them again.
Or bringing them back again. Yeah. I know it's too much for people who probably would be listening to this. It's like pretty overwhelming, so much of information. But the last three questions I would ask is like, again, the silica, fulvic acid, and the supplements you have. So maybe a quick, quick take on your perspective on, what you feel, how this could help.
For sure. Silica is really important. I would say out of any supplement you can take right now, out of everything, that one right now is the most important. And Gary expounded a little bit in the beginning where he said diatomaceous earth. So what that actually is it's fossilized algae, because a lot of people ask, oh, is it vegan? Is it this? Can I take it? Is it safe for my body? It's basically fossilized algae over time. And that component, when we put it into our body, it replenishes our silica. And what happened right now, or what's happened is, because of all the chemicals in our environment, a lot of silica is being reduced in our body. And when our body doesn't have adequate levels of silica, we have a really hard time hydrating and even utilizing the minerals that are already in our body. So things like vitamins that we take in, even from food, if you don't have silica, they have a much more minimal effect than what it would if you had silica in your body. So right away is you can do one thing to change anything. Rather than taking all these different vitamins and supplements, if you were to just take silica, your body will go through such a rapid shift, because what it's doing is it's allowing your body to take in the nutrients, even from water. And so people who have been deficient in silica, which I would say is almost everyone on the planet right now, because we're all living in so many chemicals, they're living in a state of chronic dehydration. That takes years and years to build up. I think it's about 6 to 7 years of slowly dehydrating the body before you enter the state of chronic dehydration. And so when you start putting silica into the body, you start reversing the chronic dehydration, which is actually, I would say, is the cause of a lot of the issues that we have right now. Is if you just hydrate the body, there's so many little things in the body that are just resolved away as a result of that. Another big one is Irish sea moss, which is also part of the supplements that we tell people to take. Like, we have our own supplements that have patented ingredients in them, but if you can't afford those, you can go out there and just, you can grab a big bag of diatomaceous. It's super cheap. Just make it super cheap. It's super cheap. Grade is the only thing you got to look for. It usually will say it's from fresh water, and you get like a 20 pound bag for like $30 or something. You mix a little bit in your water, The one thing I would suggest is to start at a really low dosage, like 1 teaspoon or even half a teaspoon. Because what happens is when we take the silica into our body, especially diatomaceous earth, it starts clearing out a lot of parasites or any other toxins we have, especially in our gut. And if we have a higher load in our body, it can feel really uncomfortable at first, especially if you take a lot. It's like a detox that happens. So we tell people just start with a small amount, and the dosage is very intuitive, meaning take a small amount, see how your body feels. And if it feels good, add a little bit more. And then over the course of a few months, try to get up to like 2 tablespoons. Yeah, just slowly increase, slowly increase. And it's pretty amazing what happens, because I've heard this from almost everyone who I've told about this, is that they notice that they drink way less water.
Yeah.
They stop drinking as much water. I had a friend who I create music with, and he always has this big jug of gallon of water with him. And he's always sipping water. And when I started telling him about the diatomaceous earth, he was like, right away, he noticed the next day, he's like, I drank way less water.
Yeah, it happened with me too. I mean, I've been following nutritional diets since a long time, so I make sure, I keep myself hydrated. I have my sipper here, but I haven't sipped since we started the session. I'm like, okay, I don't feel thirsty. But sometimes, yeah, maybe it's, I used to drink way a lot, like 4 to 5 liters a day, but it's at least less than that now. But I still keep myself, hydrated.
Exactly. And so what that's showing is that even though we're taking in water, our body's not utilizing that water, and it's just going right out.
Sure.
When the silica comes into the body, we actually are able to start utilizing the water. And especially if you have really good water, like we talked about, then it has an exponential effect. For me, I would try to get like 2 liters of water every day. I'd feel thirsty. Now, after I've used adding silica into my system, I probably drink maybe 1 to 2 glasses maximum a day. And ideally, I mean, this is what Gary would say, is that we don't need to drink water at all, and you can get it from your foods.
Yeah.
You're eating proper food, you're eating fruits, you're getting everything you need in. You're not going to need it over time. So it kind of breaks this little, we mentioned food before, organic food. Especially if you start incorporating really good water and your body's hydrated, your need for food even starts dropping as well. You don't need it as much. The same way you don't need as much water.
You're feeling your energy that's required for your body, and then you get that, through your food and water, like at least, the water from your food. So
exactly. And so for the other supplements would be iris sea moss that we always suggest to people.
That's on the expensive note, right? Like the iris sea moss is a pretty expensive comparatively than silica. Isn't
Yeah, it already costs a little bit more, and you have to be really careful on how it's sourced, because a lot of places.
I found this on the web, or is there another like? Check it out.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Sorry about that. I think I didn't even say the name, but it just popped up.
Oh my God. So I was saying is that the iris sea moss is you have to be a little bit more careful with that one, because depending on where you get it from, it may not be organic. It may not be from a natural source. There's a lot of sea moss that's farmed, meaning that it's treated in an environment that's not natural. But trying to source sea moss in different ways, there's different ways you can go about it. So if you were looking for it in a capsule form, usually it ends up costing a little bit more. Yeah. What people can do is you can buy a sea moss in a raw form, which is not that expensive. I think you can get like a 1 pound bag for like maybe $60. And what that is it's a bag of, it's like dried. And so what you would do is prepare it. You soak it in water. Usually I always squeeze like some lime in it. It usually has a very strong ocean flavor in it. So
I actually like the ocean flavors. I keep it the way it is. First time I tried with the lime and lemon, but I'm like, no, let's try the raw form. Yeah, I actually think that I'm like, it's a different feeling. Yeah,
exactly. And that way I feel like is a little bit better, because that little bag will create you like so many jars. And so that's the one thing you got to be careful about, is because it's so dried, it looks like you're taking it a little bit, but it expands like crazy when you put it in water, and it keeps for about, I would say about a month before it starts going bad. So if you end up making it too much, just freeze it, and you can use it when you need to.
And these things, yeah.
Fulvic acid is really cool because it actually helps detox your body, and it's really good for the pineal gland. It basically decalcifies. And calcification is really the body becoming hardened over time. And when we reduce stress, we do fascial maneuvers, we're actually reducing a lot of the calcification. So something like fulvic acid, if you were to use that in combination with what you were doing, because they're taking care of themselves, it has a really good result. So one really good source of fulvic acid would be like shilajit, especially in the Indian community. They use that a lot. That's kind of like, I would say, is like the Indian version of sea moss, because it's super high in minerals, it's naturally found, and it has fulvic acid in it. So that would be another source. Like if you can't get sea moss or you want to try something different, try to find some really good shilajit, and that alone will have a really big benefit as well.
Since you talked about Shilajit, in India, it has a a different narrative or different perception towards Shilajit. So again, I don't know. It's all about perception. So they only think Shilajit is only to boost your potency.
Yes.
Or but it does bring lots of effects, or not side effects. I'm saying lots of benefits, right?
Yeah. And like the biggest one
That is just based on the mindset, the Indian mentality, or at least if the narrative, if I have to talk about, is only limited to the potency thing. Like they only think, okay, this is only for this.
Exactly. And like a good way to think about all of these supplements, especially Irisemos or Shilajit or any of the superfoods, really, what we're trying to bring into the body that we don't get out of food are the trace minerals. And trace minerals are like a broad range of minerals that are normally you would get this out of like the dirt and then the earth. But because we're eating food that's been grown in earth that hasn't been mineralized, or it lacks minerals because it's being used so much, a lot of the old farming practices are not there anymore, where they would rotate vegetables so that it would replenish the soil. So basically, we're growing a lot of our food in soil that is not dense in nutrients. And so a lot of the trace minerals that we would call they don't exist in the food. And so finding the places in our environment where we can get those in, and it might be through fulvic acids, or it could be trace minerals through Irisemos, or there's a lot of different superfoods that will really help. But the key component here is that if you don't have silica in your body and you start adding all of these things in, you're going to have very minimal effect from what's going on.
Won't be able to absorb it like truly.
Exactly. And like the beautiful part about something like sea moss or shilajit or any of these superfoods is that instead of having to take, like if you look at people's supplement regimen, like my parents are a great example, they have this cabinet full of vitamins.
Yeah.
So that and that and that. The one reason I really love taking in sea moss is like it's basically got everything in it. Maybe there's one or two things that are missing, but I can replace so many vitamins by just taking this one thing that's also natural, it hasn't been processed. And I think for that alone, it was really, really powerful. So those are probably the two main supplements. And the fulvic acid is a great addition. I personally haven't used it a lot, but I really want to experiment with that one. So I'm gonna try using that one. We're gonna try to get some here, and I'll give it to Gary because he's very sensitive, and whenever his body's very sensitive to how it reacts in the body, and he could tell right away what it's doing. So we like to experiment with these things because we're in a bit of fascia, really loose. You feel everything very intensely. So the smallest little thing reduce into your body, you feel it right away. And so it's fun to experiment with these things. And so on supplements, there's something interesting we found recently, which you might think is interesting, is chia seeds. We found that chia seeds they provide a different type of protein to the body, because there's a big thing in the community about protein. We need all this protein. And so in our perspective of the body, we're addressing the fascia. We're not really trying to train our muscles very much. We're actually training our fascia so that our bodies become fascially dominant and not muscle dominant. Because if you've looked at anyone's body who is muscle dominant, specifically like a bodybuilder's, you notice that their range of motion is very limiting. And when they get older in life, they have all of these problems. They get very stiff.
The muscles drops and like it becomes saggy. Yeah.
Exactly. So their bodies are super, super dehydrated. They get very stiff over time. So we're experimenting with having bodies that are fascially dominant, where your fascia is actually the dominant aspect of the body and the muscles are just there to support. And so in that type of body, it requires a different type of fuel. and a different type of nutrients of protein, especially. So we found that chia seeds have a different effect on the body than other types of protein. And it was used a lot by ancient cultures like the Mayans, and there were some other, I think the Aztecs as well. They would just have a pouch of chia seeds and they would be able to walk for miles and miles and miles.
I'm so glad because I've been using chia seeds since years. It's not like I saw kids or something. I just add it onto my like when I have a protein shake and all, or my how do you say oatmeal.
Yeah.
I just add chia seeds and cinnamon, a bit of cinnamon on top. So it's like I never worked with like all these benefits it brings, but yeah, I just liked it the way it.
Yeah, so the interesting fact about chia seeds is the actual name chia. I believe if you were to find the etymology of it and what it actually means in its origin language, it actually means oily. So what happens when it goes into your body, it actually lubricates all of your joints and it hydrates the fascia in a different way. So that's what really works.
A good protein and a fat mixed together.
Exactly, and it's an emulsifier, so it helps break down the water and fats together. So when we started taking it, we started noticing that our fascia started feeling very like stretchy and almost like it got lubricated even more. Like I could pull it and twist it more. So I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So we did an experiment is where we were using diatomaceous earth like in our bath water. So if you were to take a bath, sprinkle a little bit of diatomaceous earth in it, which helps bring, because your body is absorbing water, even if you're sitting in a shower, you're still taking in water. So that's another really good way to use diatomaceous earth is in the bath. Epsom salts are really good too, because they help hydrate your fascia through the magnesium that's in the Epsom salts. But if you take chia seeds and you grind them up in like a coffee grinder, put a little bit in your bath water with the diatomaceous earth, and it will make your skin feel like it's so soft, it's crazy. Wow.
Okay,
It's a cool tip to try out.
I'll definitely try. Since you talked about the tip, I had one tip also for people who want to start with silica. If you have that with apple cider vinegar, it absorbs more faster because apple cider vinegar has additional properties that help silica absorb to the.
That's beautiful. And I think the one thing to take notice too is once you start incorporating all these things into your lifestyle, I feel like you start feeling the effects of things a little bit more. You get more sensitive to things in your environment.
More certainly, yes. Like, it's evident. It's evident, and I've seen in myself and also in different people, at least Gary and so many other people. Jason, like, for instance, Jason, right? So Jason, how he used to look last year versus Jason this year is like completely different. So, yeah, amazing.
Completely shifted. I mean, I have an interesting question for you. I mean, have you noticed your sensitivity change over like things in your environment where maybe it's like smells or chemicals? For me, I've noticed that because I haven't been using things like cologne or other chemicals, when they appear in my environment, I'm like, oh my God, it's super intense. Like when someone walks in here, sometimes there's a class going on and we have other people from the public come in. If there's like one person wearing perfume, it's like overloads my senses. And I was like, God, I didn't realize how intense this was before.
So for me, I would say I'm pretty observant by nature, but I've starting to observe more, like things have been more like energy wise, more clear to me. Like if someone's feeling low, if someone's feeling high on energy, and I'm like pretty spot on. Like I told the other day, like you seem to be a bit lost. Is everything all right? They're like, how do you know? I mean, how do you identify all these small things? I mean, I did point out a few things, and I'm like, yeah, how do you point at all these small things? I'm like, no, I just realized because I could feel that energy. So I feel more on the connection side, and personally, from my perspective on myself, I feel more, less sensitivity because I had more food sensitivity issues. I was following FODMAP diet since like last at least 6 years. And it's difficult because FODMAP like basically eliminates most of the foods that you could eat. And to be honest, like since past few days, few weeks, like I just finished yesterday my 3-day food fast, just like the fruits, like only fruits, no carbs, nothing, and no fats, no carbs, just the fruits. And surprisingly, all the fruits that didn't used to suit me, I had all those fruits and I was pretty fine.
Wow.
Like apple. Apple doesn't, like all the cruciferous vegetables and fruits doesn't suit me. I made sure that, I'm at least eating one apple so that, whatever is belongs to that particular family, I'll like have at least one so that I see how my body reacts to it. And all this while, I always used to have something or the other, like I'm either feeling low, I'm exhausted, my energy drains out when I eat something that doesn't suit my body because I get dehydrated. So I was pretty high on energy, and I've like made sure that I try everything, and that's where. So I'm trying to do more of these, like at least once in a month or something like that, so that I could slowly start to learn as we talked about fascia. Similarly, I want my digestive system to learn how they could adapt to the few of the vegetables and fruits that I've been missing, like, since many years. I long to eat, like I have so much of longing to eat that, but I cannot eat because it doesn't suit me. But at the end of the day, I cannot be just deprived of it. I just train my mind and body, and whatever I need to train, I just need to train that. Okay, I need to start, slowly. One day, I should be able to eat this.
Yeah, that's important. That's a good point you make. Is like we call something like that contrast, where you were doing something before and now you're not. But creating a change in your body and then going back to something you did before and seeing how it functions. It's an important aspect, because your body needs contrast to understand the difference. A lot of people get really hard on themselves when they have a certain food diet and they fall off and they try something else. But on a different layer, it's like your body actually needed that contrast to feel whatever you were doing, how it actually was functioning in your body. And you say the same thing with fascial maneuvers. Like, you might do them for 2 or 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden, life happens. You forget about them. You do it for, you stop doing it for a week. But then you start feeling all of these things like, oh, when this starts hurting, this is for you. And then you're about back and do it again. But you needed that jump to really understand what it's doing. So the biggest thing I tell people who are going through that is just be compassionate towards yourself, hold space, and just understand that you need to see both sides for your brain to really perceive the difference. So it's okay if that happens. Just go back into it. And now you've peeled a new layer that now you're like, okay, I can move forward now. So that's really cool that you're doing that.
At least you understood what's wrong. Yeah. Or at least you understood, going back to your old life, like, okay, this didn't make sense. And then you plan to go back to your new life. Yeah. And again, so I think that's what I had. And it's a pretty, like, I never realized, we have way gone over time. And
Yes.
I appreciate your time. So much of knowledge, so much of things that probably people could learn from this session, and a lot of things they could implement in their day-to-day life. So thanks again, Manvinder. If you want to add something, one last thing to everyone who's listening to this.
What I would say is, after listening to this, just take a moment and just give yourself some time in your day. It might even be 5 minutes, it might be 2 minutes, but just take some time to take care of yourself. It might even just be a small thing, like doing something that you really love that you haven't done in a long time. But I found that when you start introducing a little bit of time in your day to something that you really love, it might be a movement, it might be fascia rollers, it might be something that will make you happy as a child, but just that little bit gives your body a chance to really relax. And you'll notice that over time, you have more and more time and space to do the things that you really love. Because I feel like those are the things that get missed out.
Yeah.
We have to really take time for. So those little things are, we call them like self-love, but incorporating more things like that into your lifestyle for me has had the greatest benefit. So I would really ask people listening to find what those little things are and just take like 15 minutes to do that thing. It doesn't have to be an hour. It doesn't have to be this big thing. It might just be like, oh, I really love reading and I haven't done reading in a while. I haven't played my guitar. Like, even for 5 minutes, that little bit amount of joy that it creates in your life is going to give you more space in everything else that you're doing. And I think as a result, you'll notice that your lifestyle will just, improve, and you'll just feel happier and better as a person.
Amazing. One last question again. So one thing you could change at this point, or you would want to change at this point in you, in environment, or like overall?
One thing I would like to change. Wow, that's a good question. I don't really think there's a lot that I would like to change right now, just because everything that I've gone through has allowed me to get to this point. So it's revealed certain things in my life that, it's allowed me to understand the body and myself in a certain way. If there was one thing I would add more into my life, was something that what I just spoke about, is creating more time for those little things that I love to do. Because I'm a creative, I love making music and film. So creating more time to do those things, I think, is that last little thing that I need to do. And I think the biggest understanding I got from that was just understanding that the traumas that I went through were actually lessons for me to learn to where I am now. So I don't feel bad about them. I'm actually happy, and I'm really grateful for those things. So it maybe would just be incorporating more gratitude into my life.
All right, amazing. Thanks again, Manvinder. Thanks for your time. Much appreciated. And thanks again for all the information.
No problem. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me.